It was a quiet, seemingly ordinary street in the heart of the city, the kind of place most people pass by without a second thought. The flicker of streetlights and the occasional hum of passing cars were the only sounds that interrupted the silence. But to the locals, there was one person who kept this neighborhood alive. A street janitor named Maria, with her worn-out boots, a faded green uniform, and an old broom she swept with almost every evening. Maria had become an unnoticed fixture, an invisible presence in the bustling city. But little did the thugs who made this area their playground know. Maria was not just another city worker. She wasn't someone they could push around or underestimate. You see, beneath that humble exterior lay the most powerful woman in the city, a woman who, for reasons unknown to most, had chosen to remain in the shadows. And every day, as the sun began to set, the thugs would come out, thinking they had the upper hand. They'd toss trash in front of her, throw insults her way, or make threats as they passed her by. She took it all in stride, sweeping up the mess they left behind. To everyone else, she was just another janitor doing her job. But to those who dared to cross her, they had no idea what kind of danger they were truly playing with. One evening, a group of notorious gang members made their usual rounds, their swagger unmistakable as they walked through the streets with an air of entitlement. Maria was cleaning the curb when they noticed her. They snickered among themselves, looking at her with condescending smiles. They'd been doing this for weeks, bullying her just for fun. And each time, Maria said nothing, her eyes calm, her movements steady. It made them laugh even harder. They thought it was amusing. This elderly woman, cleaning up after them, barely a challenge. But that night, something was different. The leader of the group, a tall man with a scar on his cheek, approached Maria with a slow, mocking step. "Hey, old lady," he called out, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Got anything useful to do? Or are you just here to clean up after us again?" Maria paused. Her broom stopped mid-swipe. She didn't look up at him. Her head remained bowed, and her focus stayed on the task at hand. But for the first time, the streetlights seemed to dim slightly, casting an eerie glow over her. The group laughed, thinking nothing of it. They were used to this, people cowering in the face of their intimidation. But as they taunted her more, something shifted. Without warning, Maria stood up straight. Slowly, deliberately, she looked up. Her eyes, dark, unwavering, met the thug's with a piercing intensity. It sent a chill down his spine, a feeling he couldn't explain, one that made him question his own bravado. The others noticed it too. They stopped laughing, their smirks faltering as a strange, silent tension thickened in the air. "You think you can pick on me because I'm a janitor?" Maria's voice was calm, but it had an edge to it. It wasn't loud, but it carried power, as if every word were carefully chosen, as if it held a weight that none of them expected. "You think you can control me because of what you see on the surface." She took a small step forward, her posture straightening further. The leader tried to laugh it off, but the tremor in his voice was undeniable. "What's your problem? Old woman, you think you can—" Before he could finish, Maria's hand shot out in a blur of motion. In an instant, she had disarmed him, taking his weapon from him as if it were nothing. The thug's eyes widened in disbelief. The others, who had been standing around, suddenly took a few steps back. This wasn't just any janitor. Something was very wrong. Maria's movements were fluid, precise, like someone who had trained their whole life for this very moment. And in that moment, the gang members realized that they weren't dealing with a helpless woman. They were facing someone far more dangerous than they could have imagined. But who was she? And why had she been living a quiet life on the streets, when she had the skills to dismantle a whole gang single-handedly, as the leader stumbled back, trying to regain his composure. Maria simply stared at him, her gaze unwavering. Don't make the mistake of thinking power is only measured in size, strength, or what you wear on the outside, she said, her voice low, almost a whisper, but with an undeniable force behind it. You should have learned that by now. The gang members exchanged uneasy glances. The street felt suddenly colder, darker. For a moment, they were unsure of what to do. Maria hadn't lifted a finger beyond that single motion, but the aura around her had shifted. It was as if she had unlocked something inside herself that they couldn't touch, something they couldn't comprehend. With one swift motion, she returned the weapon to the leader, but it wasn't an act of kindness. It was a signal. Take your friends, she said simply, and get out of my city. And just like that, the gang members turned and fled, their bravado shattered. The leader stumbled, trying to save face, but the damage was done. They knew they'd been played. Maria watched them go, her expression unreadable. But inside, there was a quiet satisfaction, a deep-seated knowing. This wasn't over. This was only the beginning. What the thugs didn't know, and what no one else knew, was that Maria wasn't just a street janitor. She was a former elite, someone who had once ruled the city from the shadows. A woman with unimaginable strength, a past buried in secrecy, and a mission that none of them could ever understand. As the sound of their retreating footsteps faded, Maria looked down at her broom. It wasn't just a tool for cleaning the streets anymore. It was a symbol of a life she had chosen to leave behind, but one that was now being dragged back into the light. The quiet janitor was gone, and in her place stood the most powerful woman in the city. But there was one question left unanswered. Why had she returned now? The streets of the city were about to change, and no one, not even the most dangerous gang leaders, knew what was coming next. The city had long since fallen into a rhythm, its pulse dictated by the chaotic ebb and flow of its streets, its underworld, and its fragile sense of peace. People walked around each other, oblivious to the silent wars waging just beneath the surface. Maria, for all the years she spent sweeping the streets, had seen it all. The rise of gangs, the corruption of powerful officials, the endless struggles for control. But she had never been one to interfere. For a long time, she had kept to herself, choosing to stay under the radar, hiding her true self from a world that had no place for someone like her. Her past, a life she had left behind, was a labyrinth of shadows. Once, she had been a force to be reckoned with, a woman who could dismantle enemies with a single thought, a mind sharper than any blade. Her name had been whispered in hushed tones among those who knew better. She had been the kind of woman who didn't take orders. She gave them. But everything had changed when her life was turned upside down by betrayal. The betrayal of the very people she had trusted most. They had used her, manipulated her, and when it was all said and done, they had discarded her like a broken tool. That betrayal led to her decision to disappear, to start over, to become Maria, the humble street janitor. She had hoped that by hiding in plain sight, no one would ever come for her. But the city had a way of pulling you back in, no matter how hard you tried to escape. The gang members weren't the only ones who had been watching her. Far from it, in the shadows, there were others. Others who remembered the woman Maria had once been. People who still feared her. People who saw her return as a signal. Her reappearance on the streets was no accident. It was the start of something much bigger, something no one could ignore. The city had always been a battleground, but now it was a powder keg, ready to explode. Maria's decision to act, to step into the light after all these years, was the spark. The thugs, ignorant of her past, were only the beginning, but they were a warning that things were about to change. The leader of the gang that Maria had faced wasn't just any street thug. His name was Vance, and he had a reputation for being ruthless. He had risen through the ranks by exploiting the very cracks in the city system, using fear and violence to bend people to his will. And though he had never heard of Maria before, that fateful night, he quickly learned just how dangerous she could be. His pride had been bruised, and now he was more determined than ever to track her down and prove that he was the one in control. Vance knew that to maintain his power, he had to crush any threats before they gained momentum. And Maria, though she had shown him a glimpse of her power, was the kind of threat that couldn't be ignored. He began to gather information, piecing together the puzzle of her past. What he found was enough to make him rethink his approach. Maria wasn't just a janitor. She wasn't just a simple woman with a broom and a few sharp moves. She was a force that could destroy everything he had built. But there were others too who had their eyes on Maria, and not all of them had bad intentions. Sophia, a former ally of Maria's from the old days, had been watching from the sidelines. Sophia was a journalist, but her true passion was uncovering the city's dark secrets. She had been trying to get to the truth about Maria for years, but Maria had always kept her distance. Sophia respected that. After all, they both knew how dangerous the truth could be. But as the gangs began to stir, as the city's delicate peace began to crack, Sophia couldn't ignore it any longer. She needed to find Maria, to understand why she had returned, and what she planned to do with the power she had kept hidden for so long. Sophia's search for answers would soon bring her face to face with Vance, and their interests would collide in ways neither of them expected. The city's future rested on the decisions they would all make, and Maria, with her quiet strength and hidden past, would be the one to tip the scales. As Maria continued to sweep the streets, she couldn't shake the feeling that the city was growing more dangerous by the day. She had felt it in her bones when she had stepped into the light for the first time. Old enemies were resurfacing, and new threats were rising up in the shadows. The quiet life she had carved out for herself was slipping through her fingers, and she knew that sooner or later she would have to face the consequences of her return. But she wasn't the same woman she had been. She had changed. She had learned the hard way that hiding from her past didn't make it go away. It only allowed it to grow stronger. And now she had a choice to make, to keep running, or to finally confront the forces that had driven her into hiding in the first place. Vance wasn't the only one looking for her. There were others too. Others who knew what she was capable of and wanted to control it. She wasn't the only powerful woman in the city. There were factions, groups with their own agendas, each waiting for the moment when Maria would reveal herself fully. Some wanted her as an ally. Others wanted her dead. And then there were those who were content to sit back, watch, and wait for the chaos to unfold. But Maria wasn't going to let them have their way. She was done being a ghost in the shadows. She would make her stand. But who would she stand against? And who would she stand with? The streets of the city had always been a battleground, but now, with Maria's return, it was about to become the stage for a much larger conflict, one that would change the future of the city forever. As the night grew darker and Maria continued her work, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to explode. The city was on the brink of something big, and the question wasn't whether or not the city could survive it. The question was, who would come out on top? And when the dust settled, who would be left standing? The city was trembling now, each corner and alley crackling with the anticipation of something immense. Maria knew it was coming. the tension in. The air had grown too thick to ignore. Vance, with his arrogance and brute strength, wasn't just another thug. He was the spark that could ignite a war between the city's most powerful forces. But what Vance didn't understand, what no one understood, was that Maria wasn't the woman they thought she was. She wasn't just some street janitor with a hidden past. She was the storm, the reckoning. All those years of silence had been, the calm before it. And now, as the gangs closed in, as the city's power players aligned to challenge her, Maria would finally reveal the truth. Her true power, the strength she had buried deep within her, had never been about brute force or flashy moves. It was about understanding the city, its people, and the shadows that controlled it. That night, Vance thought he had her cornered. He had tracked her down, bringing his thugs, ready to squash the threat Maria posed before it could grow any larger. But what he didn't know was that Maria had already planned for this moment. As Vance and his crew descended on her, confident in their numbers, they found themselves facing something they hadn't prepared for. Maria had quietly turned the tables. Every street they had walked through, every corner they had passed, Maria had already set the stage. With a swift motion, she signaled to allies she had kept hidden. Old friends, new ones, and some powerful figures from the city's underground. The streets were no longer hers to sweep. They were hers to command. The thugs who had once picked on her, taunting her as an easy target, were now caught in a trap. The powerful woman they had underestimated was now controlling the fight, pushing them back with ease. Vance, for the first time, felt the true weight of her presence. He had made one fatal mistake. He had underestimated Maria's resolve. She wasn't just powerful in the physical sense. She knew the city's veins. She knew how to bend the very streets to her will. The very air felt charged with the electric energy of an unstoppable force. In a final fierce confrontation, Maria stood face to face with Vance. The once cocky leader of the gang, now trembling, couldn't comprehend what had happened. He had expected to crush her with sheer force, but he had failed to see the depth of her power, the power that lay in her ability to read people, to understand their weaknesses, and to use them against them. The battle had been won before it even started. Maria's voice, calm and controlled, cut through the chaos. "You should have stayed in your lane, Vance. This city doesn't belong to you. It never did." With that, she moved swiftly, taking him down in one decisive strike. But she didn't kill him. No, that wasn't her style. She left him for the city to decide his fate. As Vance was dragged away by the city's law enforcement, his gang scattered, realizing they had lost not just a battle, but a war. The streets had chosen Maria. The city had chosen her. And in that moment, everything had shifted. But Maria didn't want the power. She didn't want the throne that everyone else was fighting for. She had learned long ago that power was a curse, not a blessing. She had been there, at the top, and she had seen the destruction it could bring. No, what she wanted was peace for the city, something that had long been denied. And with the downfall of Vance and the gang, that peace was finally within reach. Sophia, who had followed Maria's rise from the shadows, was there to witness the moment. She had always believed in Maria's strength, but now she saw something else. A leader who wasn't driven by ambition, but by a desire to protect the city she loved. It was a quality few had, and Sophia knew that this was the story she had been waiting for. The story of a woman who had been pushed to the edge, but had refused to be broken. As the city began to heal from the chaos, Maria returned to her work. But this time, it wasn't just sweeping the streets. It was something deeper. She was now the city's protector, a symbol of resilience and quiet strength. People would no longer see her as a janitor. They would see her as the force that saved them all. Vance's rise and fall was a warning, a reminder that no matter how much power one had, it could all be taken away, and Maria's victory was proof that sometimes the most powerful people aren't the ones who seek power. They are the ones who protect those who need it most. And as for the city, it had learned a lesson it would never forget. Never underestimate the quiet ones, the ones who know the streets better than anyone else. They are the ones who will always rise when it matters most. With the sun setting over the city, Maria looked out over the skyline. The streets were quieter now, safer, and, for the first time in a long time, she could feel peace. The power she had fought for wasn't the kind that could be seen. It was the kind that resonated in the hearts of those who believed in her. She had protected the city, and in return, the city had protected her. But as she walked down the now, calm streets, she couldn't help but wonder, was this peace truly permanent, or was the calm only temporary? The city had always been unpredictable, but for now, Maria had the peace she so desperately craved, and that was enough. The battle for power was over. The streets had chosen their protector, and Maria had won, not just the battle, but the city's future.